Do you know the topic?
I do not.
I'll reveal it to you then.
This is going to be fun.
Yeah.
Welcome everybody to Live Q&A. I am Pastor Dave, and with me is recovering heretic Dan. How's it going, Dan?
It's going really, really well.
Good.
And today's topic is brand new to Dave. He has not been prepared for this.
This is going to be real fun.
So
not that I prepare really at all. But
at least you can get your mind in the right place.
Yeah.
For when I fling the topics like this of communion through the, no, not communion through the millennia. I blew my own thing.
Yeah, you blew your own thing.
Cannibalism through the millennia.
Okay.
So, which
yes.
is our way of getting into communion.
Yes.
Because that was one of the kind of turnoffs in the early church from outsiders.
Yeah, it was a Romans had 3 charges: that we were cannibals, that we were incestuous, and that we were atheists. Was there three conventional charges?
All right, now the cannibals I can see, and that's going to be the big topic today, of why Christians were viewed as cannibals. But the other 2 I wasn't aware of. Why atheists and why...
incestuous, because
incestuous especially.
We talked about all that language about brothers and sisters loving each other. The Romans couldn't get their heads around the fact that it was metaphorical, so they thought we literally meant it.
So did the Romans, because the Greeks had like 1,000 words for love, distinguishing it.
Yeah.
And that Rome didn't? Latin doesn't have that?
I mean, they do, but they do, but they still couldn't wrap. It's like, what do you mean, you brothers and sisters, and you love each other? And there's those lines about in Paul that say, greet each other with a holy kiss, and, that kind of stuff. And they took that all quite literally. So
they just extended it out.
Yeah.
And what about the atheism? Because obviously they worshipped a god. Wasn't that not
we
enough?
We didn't acknowledge other people's gods, and we didn't worship the emperor. So those were the...
So we didn't play nice. That was
we
the
didn't
bottom
play
line.
nice. Yeah, that was,
okay.
Yes. Right.
Okay, both of those make sense.
Yeah.
And possibly something to explore down the road.
Yeah.
Because I want to get right to the cannibalism charge.
Okay.
And that came out of today's reading, which is why I thought it would be a good topic.
Yeah.
Because this is one of the readings where Jesus goes on about, and he re-emphasizes it in this reading. It's like, I am your bread of life. And then he clarifies by saying, not a metaphor, you must eat my flesh.
Right.
And he very clear on that.
Yes.
And up until a reading like this, I also fell into the mindset of Jesus means this as a metaphor. I am the bread of life.
Right.
I'm just casting a little illusion here.
Mm-hmm.
But then when he says, I mean you eat my flesh, he seems pretty clear.
He does. Well,
you're eating my body, and there's a number of ways I want to approach this, which is why I don't know where to start. But let's start with why he emphasizes that. Why does he emphasize, no, you're actually gnawing on my flesh? Sucking my bone marrow out. I mean, he might as well say that.
Right. Where to begin with that question? Such a large question.
It is a big one.
Yeah. So context is helpful, right? Like in the immediate context of John, right? He's just done the feeding of the 5,000, right?
Right.
And John does this thing where Jesus will do a miracle, and then everybody misunderstands the miracle, and then Jesus gives this incredibly unhelpful lecture, which nobody understands
anyway.
Anyway, but where he kind of does it in that cycle of things, right?
Yeah.
So he's given them food, and everybody's been like, "You should be king, so you can keep giving us bread. It's like a free bread machine, Wouldn't it be great if the king just handed out bread like this all the time, And Jesus is like, you are misunderstanding, because in John they're never called miracles. They're called signs, and so there's this cycle of signs that Jesus does. And so it's like, you're misunderstanding the sign. is basically what it is. This is supposed to point to something about God and how God works in the world and how God works through me in the world.
Yeah.
You are misunderstanding the sign. You're interested in this because your stomachs are empty, but I can give you something that is much different and better, and that's me.
Yeah.
Is kind of the immediate context of why,
Yeah. So you're after the material, and I'm telling you your souls are empty, and they need this.
Right, and you need this. You're more importantly than where you're getting your bread.
Soul sustenance.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So why the emphasis, though? I can understand saying you're spiritually hungry.
Yeah.
But why the emphasis on the physical flesh, then?
I don't know exactly what, I get Lutheran theologian, I guess I'll go with what Gerhard Forde says. Lutheran theologian Gerhard Forde says, we are often too religious for Jesus,
wow.
and when he's talking about this text, and what he means is, we're always searching after this desperately heady, up in the clouds, up in the air, intellectual, spiritual truth, enlightenment, and Jesus is like, nah, just eat me, dude. Like, bread, wine, body, blood, like just, it gets you out of that. When we think of religion, we often think of like going to find the old man at the top of the mountain.
Yeah.
And like biblical religion is really opposed to that. Like both in Old and New Testament, it's very anti that kind of religion. And in fact, anytime humans try and do it, God typically ruins their effort.
Yeah.
Like our Elijah reading, he literally goes to a mountain. And God's only comment is, what the heck are you doing here? Go back.
Yeah.
Like,
and right to the point, what struck me about the Elijah going to the mountain reading is that the angel tells Elijah, go out, God will pass by.
Yeah.
Elijah goes out, and there's all this stuff that there's a great wind that goes by, and then there's this earthquake that goes by, and all that. But then it says, but God didn't go by.
Yeah.
So it's like the angel set him up for some kind of cruel prank.
Well, he set him up for the next where he was, right, which is the sound of sheer silence.
Silence.
I think the actual Hebrew there is like the sound of crushing silence. It's an absolute silence.
Yeah.
And that's where God is. And it's not in these, again, in the kind of go to the mountaintop experience stuff.
So it was a prank in a way, but it was a prank to teach him that you don't have to go to the mountaintop to find God.
The whole text is a setup to get Elijah to this point of, you didn't have to walk all the way out here. Like, I'm just as much. He goes to Mount Sinai, right?
So Horeb is Sinai?
Yeah, it's the same mountain. So like, same name for the same mountain. And the actual Hebrew doesn't say it's, your English translations mess this up. They say a cave, but actually it's the cave.
So it is the cave. So it's the same one Moses
This is like
in.
the exact, there's only one the cave on Mount Sinai. It's where the burning bush was. So like, basically Elijah in his exhaustion and depression has walked to the holiest spot in his religion. If you want to think about it that way, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, and God's kind of point is, you didn't have to come all the way out here, man.
Yeah.
Like, I am just as much, that's why I'm telling you to go back. I am just as much in the mess in Israel as I am on this mountain.
Yeah.
And so biblical religion is always kind of opposed to this quest to search after the old guy at the top of the mountain kind of religion.
Yeah.
And this quest to find enlightenment that way, and instead it's always about God coming to us in these very almost anti-religious flesh, blood, bread, wine, kind of things.
Well, Steve asks, then why make it so vague? There's so many of these, like you pointed out too, even going back further, or actually in the timeline going forward to the New Testament.
Yeah.
So why does Jesus make stuff so vague? That nobody understands the sign, and nobody understands the explanation.
I don't know why. I think part of it is our dunderheadedness more than, he's being pretty blunt here, right? He's being pretty honest. We just have a hard time wrapping our minds around it.
Well, I know we don't want to wrap our minds around it being cannibalism because
right.
we see that as gross.
Right.
Is this the scene? Because I don't see the I didn't read ahead. But is this where he loses a lot of disciples when they realize he's being serious and literal?
Yeah, they all get up and walk away at the end of this chapter. He goes on for about 20 more verses, and 15, 20 more verses.
And that's when they realize, no, he really means
and they
carve him up into sirloin.
Right, they all get up and go, and except for the 12. And that's actually where we get our gospel acclamation from, is Jesus looks at Peter and goes, "Are you going to leave too?" And Peter goes, "Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life." So actually, we sing it in this glorious way, but actually it's a very I don't know where else I'm going, Lord.
Yeah. So it's like the epilogue to this big moment of the disciples abandoned.
Literally everybody's left except for the 12 apostles, and that's Peter's response for why they haven't left is, I don't know where else to go,
Well, I want to pop around a little bit. First, I want to jump back to Elijah.
Yeah.
And the cave. Is that why we don't really know where Mount Sinai is? Because the current Mount Sinai doesn't have the cave, does it? Or does it?
No, I mean, the bush that we know where it is. St. Catherine's Monastery is
right there.
Is right there.
Okay.
It's actually the oldest monastery in Christian history that's still standing. It's built by Helena, mother of Constantine herself. It's still there. They have a bush they say is a descendant of the original burning bush. That's there. It's not in a cave anymore. And I don't know, you could say that's weather erosion or whatever,
But one way or the other, we do believe that is the same.
Can I absolutely verify that was the same mountain and the same bush, or descendant of the same bush? I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't have the DeLorean, as Vicar Keith said, but I'll have to borrow it from him sometime. But but I do, it is one of the oldest sites in Christianity. So, if you're going to dispute that, then you kind of got to dispute most of the religion. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
If you're going to dispute that, you got to dispute pretty much every other site and place, because that thing is old as the hills. Yeah.
In a very real, very legally binding sense.
Yeah, right.
Since you've affirmed that Jesus actually meant
this
early, and I have to say, it reminds me of Douglas Adams' The Restaurant at the Edge of the Universe, where the cow comes out and to your table to talk about what parts of it will make a great steak.
I know.
And that whole scene with Jesus reminds me of exactly that.
Yes.
Why aren't we grossed out anymore? Why don't we, just today at the communion rail, why are we seeing it as just a loaf of bread and not being grossed out by, I am drinking blood and I am eating human flesh?
Yeah,
does it mean we don't really believe it?
I hope not. Lutheran doctrine says.
I'm sorry. I know this wasn't going to be easy.
Well, we can go into what doctrine, various doctrines, right? So if you're Catholic, there's a very complicated explanation that rests on, we call this transubstantiation.
Right.
That at the moment, at the words of it, it's actually when the come Holy Spirit moment, right, in the Eucharistic prayer, the elements, the bread and the wine, their substance is transformed into Jesus' body and blood.
Yeah, so it may still have the form of bread and the form of wine, but the substance.
So Catholic philosophy and theology makes a distinction between, none of this is on the test because it's all phooey, but Catholic theology and philosophy, I'm sorry, Catholics, I love you, but makes a distinction between a thing's substance and a thing's material. are the two terms,
Okay.
right? So the material is the outward form of the substance of a true thing, right? You know, and the substance is what makes the thing. And their example for, you know, how this works is, you know, I have a beard. The outward material of Pastor Dave has a beard. But if I shave my beard, I still remain Pastor Dave. I might be divorced because my wife would divorce me, but, you know, I still remain Pastor Dave.
Yeah, the essence of who you are.
Right. So there must be something more than your outward material that makes a thing a thing.
Okay.
Right? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, I understand their reasoning, the Catholic reasoning
right.
on that.
So the then transubstantiation explanation for what happens at communion is that at the Come Holy Spirit moment, the substance of the bread and the wine, not the material, still remains materially bread and wine, right? You don't get little bits of literally, you know, Jesus's rib cage or something like that, right? You know,
you don't chew into gristle
right. But his substance, the substance of the bread and the wine, change into the substance of Jesus, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
All right. So Lutherans would look at that and go, "That's a bunch of philosophical mumbo jumbo."
Okay.
You know, which is a typically Lutheran response, right? Is that's a bunch of Aristotelian nonsense.
Okay.
You know.
So even though we understand the logic.
We understand the logic. We're not saying the logic is flawed.
Okay.
We just don't think the philosophical mumbo jumbo is necessary. You know,
Yeah.
and Luther says it simply is because Jesus says it is. Right? Jesus says is. Jesus doesn't lie. It is. And that's really all you need to know, says Luther.
See, now I'm much more willing to go with the Catholic
right.
explanation.
You're
because, just taking something on the surface, that does not, my heretical mind says, no. Because anybody can claim it. That's how you get cults. Anybody can make any claim if you don't have some kind of reasoning behind it or evidence.
And Luther would say the difference is that's Jesus, you know, and we trust Jesus' word, right? You know, and so Jesus doesn't lie to us. And so he says it is, and he says we receive forgiveness of sins. You know, there's a famous debate between Luther and Zwingli, who was a memorialist. They believed it was only done in memory, you know. And Luther, the entire debate, Luther just he took out his knife and just kept carving into the table, "This is my body." He just kept saying is means is. You know, so that's all Luther kept doing.
He just said what he meant.
Yeah, right. He says what he meant, right? The Lutheran explanation is sometimes wrongly called consubstantiation.
That it is both bread and body?
Yes.
Okay.
So
you're teaching me the Latin bit by bit, so let's figure that one out.
So that's a phrase no Lutheran theologian ever used, but it gets wrongly labeled as consubstantiation sometimes. But we believe that Jesus is truly present in, with, and under the bread. And the bread remains bread and the wine remains wine. Because Jesus says it is, it's also that, right? This bread is my body, you know. He's not lying about that either.
Yeah.
You know, and so.
So with the Lutheran explanation, we can look under a microscope and see, no, atomically it's still bread, but along with the bread comes the technical term in Lutheran theology is sacramental union. Jesus is united with the bread and the wine, you know, so that we receive Jesus. This difference is a bit of a difference without a distinction in some ways. I usually say to people we are closest to the Catholic belief than we are any other Protestant body in terms of what we believe is happening at communion. That's why our service looks so Catholic, is because there's actually very little distinction between our belief and the Catholic belief. We both believe in what is labeled the true presence, you know, that Jesus is truly present at communion, you know. And that's going to make Steve happy on the Lutheran view, that the bread is still bread. Because he writes, I don't really want to sink my teeth into Jesus' bicep. I'll take the
No,
bread.
right. And either way, you're not, because on the one hand, there's the difference between there's the substance material distinction, and with Lutherans, there's the, well, it's still bread, I kind of describe communion as the vehicle that delivers Jesus in Lutheranism, like it's like the Amazon delivery truck for Jesus, like you receive him in your very soul and presence,
Well, explore so Lutherans, Catholics believe that there's still, one way or the other, the essence of Jesus is there. Do the other Protestant denominations just believe it's symbolic? There's no actual divine
So there's a range.
to it?
There's a range of beliefs after that. Reformed theology that goes from Calvin believes. All right, vocabulary. Vocabulary term that. Vocabulary question, philosophical question that is the root difference between Lutheranism and Reformed Calvinism, basically. This is not on the test. You do not need to know this for salvation. Are there forms of non-local presence?
Non-local presence, okay.
Can Jesus' body be in more than one place at the same time?
Ah.
So the Reformed debate, this is what this question is. So the Reformed argument is Jesus is truly God, but truly human. Therefore he's truly human. Therefore his body still operates under some rule
of the physical world.
Of the physical world, which means it can't be in two places at once. Jesus has ascended to the right hand of the Father. Therefore,
he can't also
be truly present in the communion, is kind of the argument. We call that, and so the Reformed answer is no. You cannot have non-local, local as in it's right there.
So it can't be like the equivalent of like nail clippings and...
Yeah, right, because he can't be...
You're leaving parts of yourself.
You can't be non-locally, you can't be present and not located locally.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Although I'm just kind of wondering if that's like a pre-understanding of the actual physical world viewpoint. Since,
well...
we're shedding skin cells all the time. We leave pieces of ourselves
We leave
all
pieces.
over.
They mean the true self of Jesus, right? Not like the little...
Okay.
But... So the Reformed Calvinism, true Calvinism, then believes that what happens in communion is instead of Jesus coming down to you, you are being brought up to heaven with Jesus. That Jesus is truly present, but the operation is we get brought up, not he comes down.
Although I might be misunderstanding or taking it too literally, but it seems like that same argument against Jesus being in the Eucharist would apply to us also going up.
No, because
if we're here, how can we also be there?
Well, yeah. So you've kind of hit on the answer is more spiritually, right? But you've kind of hit on one of the Lutheran criticisms of this. So Lutherans have many criticisms of this. First, we say none of these words are in the Bible.
Going back to Luther's original
right?
point,
Like none of this is actually what it says. This is not what Jesus says in John 6. This is not what we hear at the Last Supper. That's our main criticism.
Yeah.
Our second criticism on the body thing is, that all sounds logically right, except his body can walk through walls. Clearly
and walk on water.
Right, and it's he's a god. So clearly his body operates on different principles than our body.
Yeah.
They don't even recognize him for most of the resurrection stories. Clearly his body operates under different, he just vanishes out of places, clearly his body operates under different principles, than our bodies do.
Right.
And then, yes, and then the other argument is, so why doesn't non-locality apply? Why does it apply to Jesus but not to us? And
that's true. He does violate a lot of concepts of space-time.
Right.
He'll be here, and then instantly he's with these people in Emmaus, and then instantly he's over here.
Right. Right. He's all over the place. And so it just doesn't. And So the result of all that is this is the essential difference in the Lutheran versus Calvinist understanding of the Eucharist is that.
Okay. And you said there's broad spectrum. So what else? What other?
The other one is Zwinglian or memorialist. This comes from a Swiss reformer named Heydrich Zwingli, who Luther was having that debate with.
Switzerland seemed to produce a lot of.
What?
Switzerland seemed to produce.
They were neutral, so if you were, they were neutral and basically unconquerable. So, if you were a reformer looking for a home base,
that was a good place to go.
It was not a bad place to go because they spoke 3 different languages. You could have French and German people in the same place, and the King of France couldn't haul off an army and hunt you down.
Yeah.
Luther's solution to this problem is the Lutheran princes literally kidnap Luther and hide him away for decades. That's their solution to this problem. But the other solution is go to Switzerland and nobody's going to bug you.
Yeah.
Because they can't.
So what did Z think then?
So Zwingli believed that it is. He puts the focus on the do this in remembrance of me. Hence why it's called memorialism. It's done in memory of Jesus to awaken our memories of all that Christ did for us. Functionally, there's what Calvin actually believed in Calvinism technically believes, and then there's what happens in operation. And for a lot of the Reformed branch, what happens in operation is Zwinglianism. The Lutheran understanding has always been, our Lutheran critique of that is many and various, but I'll actually quote Catholic Dorothy Day, who said, if it's just a symbol, to hell with it. It's to us that's...
Then we're not special in any way.
Right. If it's just a symbol, if it's just a memorial, then it's functionally useless, and we shouldn't do it.
Well, and on that line, I think it's Paul, and I don't remember which letter, but Paul also emphasized. So we've had Jesus say this is the real thing. Paul, at some point, you've pointed out that it was part of the practice way back in Paul's time, and there's some line where Paul basically, how I remember it, and I know this isn't how it was phrased, but having that Eucharist, having communion, having the bread and wine, is part of what defines actual service.
Yeah, that's a Lutheran, right.
So given that, if Paul is saying that too, why would we have Christian churches today that don't have the Eucharist every Sunday?
Well, because how often you do it is, Paul doesn't say how often, right?
Yeah, but he kind of, what I got out of that passage
I know, right.
was that if you don't do it, it's not really a service.
Well, that's what I think also. But, and that's literally how we define worship in Lutheranism. Is any place the word is properly preached and the sacraments properly performed.
Then you have worship.
Right. It's a low bar to clear. As long as there's properly preached and properly administered sacraments, no matter how many other things go wrong, successful worship.
So how do we have this other system then?
Well, if you don't, again, Paul never says how often you do it, literally, and if you believe it, and I have a Baptist friend who's on this spectrum, and he goes, well, Jesus also says, I am the vine, which is a form of is, but we don't literally think he's a vine. Jesus says, I am the door, but we don't literally think he's a door.
Yeah.
So why, when he says, this is my body, do we take him so literally, is their argument.
Okay.
I think
valid point.
Valid point. I think they're wrong, but valid point, and so if that's what you think, and if, for us, communion is literally doing this very literal thing, right? It's forgiving your sins. My response to people are like, I feel guilty and I don't know if I'm forgiven. It's like, well, did you have communion last week? If yes,
you are,
and then you just got to tell yourself, I'm forgiven because I had communion last week, because I had Jesus. And as Luther says, wherever Jesus is, there's the forgiveness of sins and new life, Simple as that. Just that's why it's this physical thing, so we can tell ourselves that.
So given that, why do we then have formal confession?
Well, because we need to be forgiven in all sorts of ways, right? Faith needs a multitude of things to cling to, says Luther, and so it's word and sacrament. Sacrament forgives your sins, but word does also, and you need to hear, I am pardoned, I am forgiven, but you also need to receive something that tells you I am, I am pardoned, I am forgiven.
So some of this is human psychology. We need that to believe that we're forgiven.
Yeah, right. Or we're physical beings and we need both, But if you don't believe it's literally forgiving sins like that, then it becomes a lot, even in the Reformed, like the Calvinist system, it becomes a lot less essential, then it's just word, and if you're true memorialist symbolic, it's not essential at all. It's this nice thing we do once or twice a year.
Yeah.
But it's not actually forgiving anybody anything, and the word is doing something much more important, and so it's all about what do you believe is actually, what you believe is happening there, greatly determines how often you do it.
Yeah.
Because, it's essential.
All right, we're almost out of time already. This went really fast, for me anyway.
It's a big question.
Yeah. Kate might be falling asleep, but for me it went fast. So I want to, before we stop, didn't get to half my questions, but I want to get the BTQ.
Okay.
And that is, what is, underneath it all, what's the major theological point? Why is it important to Jesus to say, no, it is my flesh? What's the theology behind that all? I know we talked about effects. You mentioned you get forgiveness or we have the reminder.
Yeah.
We've done it in memory, but from an overarching theological standpoint, why did Jesus want to emphasize this in the first place? Why wasn't his preaching and his word enough?
Well, because it's how God comes to us, right? God always comes to us not just in message, but physically. It's how God always operates. I don't know why, but even from the beginning, right? Like his first thing is circumcise Abraham, right? There's always this physicality to God from the very beginning, and so again, as opposed to the kind of let me go find nirvana or enlightenment up on the mountain, which is almost anti-physicality, like you're trying to escape the physicality, and
Gnosticism, right? And that
Gnosticism
the material is impure,
right? Plato is this way, right? The material is bad, the forms are the true thing, Whereas most religion and philosophy in human terms is anti-physicality. Sacraments and God are, really about saying, no, I physically enter the world. My literal body is given for the life of the world. And that's not an enlightened message. It's just true. And so it's important because it reminds us of the direction of true religion, and to use a kind of, Karl Barth uses this scheme where he says human religion always wants to build humans up to God, basically recreate the Tower of Babel. We'll build a tower so high we'll reach heaven, and God is always engaged in this process of knocking down that tower. And true religion is acknowledging that God always comes to us, flesh, blood,
Does that tie into why we so steadfastly believe in a resurrection of a physical body instead of being content with a soul?
It's part of it, right? Again, that physicality. God creates creation for a reason. It's not like a temporary step. It's God found the material of creation necessary,
For
whatever reason. I don't,
The firmament wasn't enough.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
I still hunger intellectually, and my curiosity is still there, but
there's a thing about the character of God which you just kind of have to acknowledge is like people's personality. Mm-hmm. You don't have a lot of explanation for why. That's just their personality sometimes, right? And so we have this God who just has some personal quirks, quirks like, he works through process, right? Mm-hmm. Could God just snap his fingers and it all be done? Yes.
Like Q.
Right, but God takes 7 days to create the earth, I don't know why, but he does, and can God, so another one is God creates this material stuff out of nothing, and thinks it's good, mm-hmm. And there's a personality to that about God that's Yahweh's personality, and
Yeah, that answer just reminds me of Kevin Smith's dogma, that God loves to incarnate so he can play skee ball.
Right, but it's funny, right? But, it's funny because there's a truth about God just loves the incarnated world, and he likes it, he thinks it's necessary and loving and wonderful. And, he, as one pastor said in a sermon, he takes joy in the way your elbows work, right? In the ligaments in your knees and the, in the arch of your foot and, things like that, right? He takes joy in the bacteria in your gut, and
it is all magnificent design engineering.
Right, and just that physicality of it all is, important.
Yeah. I love it, but we've got to end there.
Yep, we do.
Or we'll turn it into an all-day seminar.
Yes.
But thank you.
You're welcome.
And Steve, thank you. And everybody, again, if you have questions, you don't have to wait till the live broadcast. You can always email us or comment on our YouTube channel, mm-hmm. and we're happy to get to it. In fact, I prefer it when you have questions because I already know what my questions are.
Yep.
So thanks, everybody.
Peace.